Welcome to the Brave Woman, Mighty God podcast. I'm your host, Laura L. Smith. Join me as I chat with the most amazing guests about how God can and will empower us to do the same brave things the women of the Bible did. Stand up for justice, say yes, be the change, do the crazy things, step into freedom, find community, reach out, share our gifts, and so much more. Make sure you're following the show so you don't miss a single episode. Today, I'm chatting with my good friend, Alli Patterson. Alli is an author, teaching pastor, speaker, wife, and mom to four. She's passionate about helping others build a life on the firm foundation of Jesus' truth and grace through authentic teaching rooted in Scripture. Alli and I are going to talk about friendships, community, good ones, bad ones, how to bravely find them and bravely make them last. Such great stuff here. Can't wait for you to hear. This is so fun. I love having friends on the podcast because it's just like we're sitting and getting coffee, which I wish we could do way more than we actually get to. So it feels like a gift to be able to do it online. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be with you. And I feel exactly the same way. Wish we had a cup of coffee in our hand instead of headphones in our ears. But
yeah, but here we are.
I'll
here we are.
take what we've got.
Absolutely.
Gratefully.
We're going to dive right in. And I'm just going to start with asking you who your favorite woman of the Bible is and why.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I have a clear answer. Rahab is my favorite woman.
I love
in
Rahab.
the Bible. Rahab was, if you are listening and you don't know her story, she was a prostitute who hid spies that came into Jericho before the fall of that city. And she hid them because she had as much as she could have for where she was. She had an actual faith in the God of Israel. And I love her for so many reasons. The first of which is she has a really messy past and God brought her into his family. The end of her story is that the nation of Israel comes in, conquers the city, and as a trade-off for saving the spies, she and her family are spared. And so as she is spared, she also then isn't just spared. And this is like why I love her story, because it's all of our stories with God. Anyone who has found Christ has this story. Like, you're not just spared. He actually married her into the family. As an outsider, as a foreigner, she ends up marrying into the family. And not just into the family, she ends up being in the lineage of Jesus himself.
Yeah.
So she's one of the women that just embodies to me the truth of all of our stories in Christ, which is we are sinners who need saved. And she literally got saved from a terrible past into the family of God. And she was put into a royal line. Yeah. And I just think, that's me. That's my story.
Yes.
And so, man, I love her. She also, side note, which is probably equally why I love her, she was smart and clever and bold, and she just used the resources that she had to express her faith in God. Yes. And she was amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that God cared at all that her act of faith was actually a lie and hiding the spies. That was genuinely an act of faith in him. And I think we put God in this box where, it has to all look a certain way and you're supposed to be a certain way. And nice people don't have stories of being prostitutes and things like that. You know what? Most deep, radical believers in Christ have something closer to that than a nice religious story about loving God. So
no,
I love her for all those reasons, and I will always love her story. Aren't you glad you asked? You got an earful.
So glad. So we're all broken like Rahab, and we all have an opportunity to be saved like she was. And I also love for Rahab that she didn't have all the things you might think you need, right? So you said she was super clever and resourceful, but she wasn't a spy. She wasn't in government. Like when she decides to hide the enemy, she's not a member of the CIA. She doesn't have a degree in espionage. Yeah. She's just okay, here's something you guys don't know about our city. Here's if you go, here's something you guys don't know. I have straw on my roof. She just took what she had and what she knew, and God used it. Because if we just take what we have, what God has given us, and what he's let us know, he can use it to do awesome things. And I love that so much that it illustrates she's just okay, this is what I have. Here's what I got. Like, and it was something that those spies didn't have. So that I just love that God can use whatever he's given us. And I think it's an awesome testimony to who he is. I love that. Okay. Everyone listening has a lot in their lives. Alli, we were talking about some of the things in our lives just before we started, but we're all juggling family and work and our households and friendships and all the things. And I think of Naomi and Ruth, who are two friends, ride or die friends in the Bible. And together, they got through all the things. Like alone, neither of them would have done it. They had to leave their hometown. They had to travel in rough circumstances. They had to start over, find a new home, needed financial support. Like their families were broken. You think of something someone is going through who's listening. Naomi and Ruth probably went through that in some form. They were able to do it because they did it together. I think friendship makes us brave. Can you chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about the Jesus's inner three, Peter, James, and John.
Yeah.
And the story of when Peter got out of the boat, the famous story about him walking on water,
right.
When Jesus appears. And I just think like their inner connection, there's no accident that was Peter, because he was one of the closest people to Jesus. It was like his connection there is why he was willing to risk doing something so incredibly crazy.
Uh-huh.
And I can easily see that mirrored in my own life. Like the closer the relationship, the more it makes me brave. I think about that connection between Peter and Jesus a lot, because Peter was this guy who was like, he just went for it, and he went for it badly sometimes too. Yeah. But he was willing to move and risk and go for it. And I think of that in my experience of living a life of faith. I think about the need to be brave and to risk and to move a lot. And I don't think you can do that without that inner circle of friends that are there. And of course, Peter's best friend was Jesus. So, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty.
None of
cool.
my best friends are currently named Jesus. However, the more like him they are, the more you get that effect in your life. That somebody who knows you, somebody that knows when to push you, somebody that knows when to pull back, somebody that knows when to take you away and rest, somebody that knows what you need taught. Like the better the friend, the more that support for a life of faith is naturally there, because the more and more of Jesus we experience. I think friends are one of those things in our lives that are meant to, could we survive without them? Yes, many of us do, but we cannot thrive without them.
That's good.
And I think about friendship as something a lot of us as, grown-ups, supposed grown-ups, feel as optional. It's like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
And really, I think friendship is essential for a life that thrives. And I am saying that to myself as much as anybody else, because I'm a grown-up with kids and a job and tons of stuff going on that I care very much about. And sometimes I shortchange my friends. And I always end up thinking, what am I doing? Like, these are the people that give me the blessing and the strength and the love and the support that I need to actually live the rest of my life.
Yeah. So I think that's true of most people. I think we've been fed this lie that everyone around us has this awesome girl gang that they're doing all this stuff with all the time. And everyone has the best friends. And we see these pictures on Instagram of girls trips and girls night out and girls coffee dates. And what we don't know is that's the only time in the last 6 months all of those people have had that experience. So I believe we all are seeing that. I believe we all long for friendship, because I know that God has made us for connection with humans. Like from the beginning, he put 2 people in the Garden of Eden, not 1. Right? Jesus, like you said, had his inner circle of best friends. God desires this for us. He desires community for us, but yet so many of us aren't there. So how did we get here?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, and you mentioned all the way back in Genesis, because I think one of the things we've forgotten is that God designed us, not just us from the outside, but he also designed the inside, like how the fabric of our soul, I guess, is sort of a common way we might express this thought, that there's an actual design to what makes our inner life thrive, what makes us feel like a whole human being. And I think we've really degraded that idea. We've really walked away from it. And we've kind of and at the same time as us forgetting that God designed us in certain ways, we are also living in a culture that constantly encourages us to shortchange the very things that are going to bring life to us from the inside out, you know? So I think it's that perfect storm of like, we have forgotten that there's a creator who designed not just how we look and what our skills are, you know, how tall we are and what color eyes we have and all that. I think a lot of us accept that, but there's also a creator that designed the way that our soul thrives and our life is supposed to work. And I'm not sure we really believe that as much as, well, I don't know what people 5 generations ago used to believe, but I don't know that we believe that to the very bottom of our hearts. So we kind of set about going like, I'll figure out how to do this. I don't really need that kind of people in my life. I could get away without, you know, and we just sort of collect people haphazardly. We go about life the way that we saw it in our home. We don't really consult God for a lot of aspects of living that, frankly, he's got a lot to say about, I think.
Yeah, he does. He does. So we've established that God actually did create us for relationships, whether we want to believe it or not.
Sure.
That he wants us to have friendships, like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like from the beginning of time, they were together, and Jesus desires the same thing for us to have, you know, people that we're super, super close with. But it takes courage to be the person to initiate a friendship, right? To say, I'm going to put myself out there and invite this friend for coffee, this woman I've kind of seen or interacted with briefly to go for a walk with me, or to have our kids meet at the playground or whatever. How would you advise women listening here being like, yeah, I would love to go on a coffee date with someone, or like meet at the playground with other people's kids, so it's not just me and my kids every time? I would love an adult interaction. How would you advise them to bravely push past that fear and just take the step to start?
Well, first of all, I'll say I have notoriously been bad at this. So what I'm about to say is because I have been terrible at this most of my life. I think you have to lean on your strengths, and I'll tell you how that looks for me.
Yeah, that's good.
I think you need to lean into using the method that you're really good at. So for me, I know if there's something in my life that is lacking, like a time with friends, I know the thing I'm really good at is making a decision to put it on my calendar. If something's important to me, one way that I'm really good about executing that in my life is if it's actually on my calendar.
Yeah.
So sometimes for me, this looks like creating a space on my calendar that says time with a friend, so that when it pops up, when the opportunity pops up, I already know I've cleared space for this. I've already decided this is important to me. Because honestly, Laura, if you ask me in the moment, I'll say no. Because I will always, in my flesh, default to whatever my plan was for the day or the week or the month, whatever my most urgent thing to do is, which is almost never to build a relationship and talk with a friend. You know, that's important, but it's rarely urgent.
Yeah.
I know myself well enough to know one of my strengths is I work the calendar pretty well. I'm pretty decisive. I know what's important to me. So if I make a decision and I have time and margin set aside for that, then I will feel like I have permission to fill it when the time comes. Now, some of you shouldn't do that. You're terrible at managing your calendar and you're an awful planner. So that is a terrible idea for you.
Right.
You, if you're super spontaneous, you need to be the spontaneous person who goes like, you know what I can do today? I can, and do that. Use that to your advantage here. But I know I will not feel permission to do it if I haven't decided ahead of time and like essentially blocked some sort of margin in my life for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really wise advice. I know for me, as I'm listening, I'm like, it wouldn't really work for me to put it on a calendar like that, but what would really work for me is I always make a to-do list for the week, both one for work and one for personal stuff. And if I just put on the to-do list, like, invite somebody to coffee, like, and I wouldn't even have to put in a name, but this week I have got to invite somebody. It's like goal setting that I do for myself each week, right?
Yeah,
so
great.
I was like, oh, that might work for me. So people listening, be creative when you hear Alli say that, like, what works for me? And I think in that same vein, as far as being creative and what works for you, a walk with a friend is ideal for me because I love to move my body. I love to get exercise. I feel like I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone in a busy day. Like I'm getting my exercise and I'm seeing that friend. But if you ask me to go get dinner with you, that fits in my life is 0 right now with my family. I like think of if you're going to invite someone, I'm not going to invite someone to dinner. right? But I'm going to invite
Right.
someone for a walk because that works for me. So be creative on what works for you, both to motivate you to do it and something that will really be life-giving to you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was just thinking I'm actually in a moment where I have two good friends that I'm struggling to see enough, and they're like close friends.
Yeah.
And I realized we need a rhythm together. And I have an idea. I just got this idea the other day and I was like, we need to solidify the thing that we do together, because I think one of the realms of friendship is it's just your week in, week out people. And with those kind of people, you have to have a rhythm.
Yeah.
It can't always be an exception. Or it's not going to work. Like you and I live far enough apart. We can't have a weekly rhythm. So we're always going to have to make a plan.
Right.
But my friends that live in my township that I should be able to see on a regular basis, I know if we don't have a rhythm, I'll go 6 weeks and I won't lay eyes on them. And that's totally unacceptable to me. But it's really hard if you had one and you lose it, we used to have a group we did together and now we don't. And so it's taken us a while to get one back. And I just had an idea the other day and I thought, I bet we could do that together.
Yeah.
So just establishing those, C.S. Lewis has a great chapter in his book called The Four Loves. And he talks about this kind of love, just your friends, your friendship love. And he talks about them as shoulder to shoulder. So you're doing something together.
Yeah.
And it's just the establishment of the thing that you do together that's really important for the friendship. He talks about how your eyes are both forward on the same thing. And there's face-to-face friends and there's shoulder-to-shoulder friends. And I think the ones that we need rhythms with are like those weekly, these are my people. I see them. We do life together. We live the same place. We like the same things, and we need those rhythms, like repetitive in our life.
Yeah. No, establishing a rhythm is great because then it holds everyone to it. It's not like, oh, I hope we get together. We actually are getting together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say the person listening, they've done all these things. They've reached out. They've been creative. They figured out how it works for them. They've created a rhythm. They've started the friendship. Awesome. You talk a lot in your new book, Blueprint for Belonging, about all of these issues of friendship and close friendships and why it matters and why we're lonely and why we need friends because Jesus had friends. But you also talk about how we need to be vulnerable to develop these deep core friendships. We can't just have the kind of relationship that Peter and Jesus had if we are afraid to share our fears, if we don't want anyone to see our messy house, literally or figuratively. So you mentioned a term, proactive self-disclosure. Can you explain that term and chat about gathering the courage to be vulnerable enough to let somebody see us?
Yeah, I talk about proactive self-disclosure. That sounds a lot more like official than it is. It's just like me to come up with some term that sounds like I know, what I'm talking about. But all I mean by that is that you take the initiative to disclose something that the other person would never know about you otherwise. That there's something about your life or who you are, something you think. Maybe it's just an opinion that you've never told anyone. I have someone in my life who's terrified to share her opinion about things because she thinks it'll make people not like her. If she thinks really strongly about something, that might turn someone off. So she just never shares her opinions about anything.
Right.
That won't turn people off, but it will also steal the ability to be truly known. And the reason this is so important is that it comes down to your ability to be loved. What we want in our relationships at the heart of them. Now, of course, this is especially important for the closer ones in our life. We want to know that we're loved. And if you will not allow someone to know you, you'll never be convinced of that. Even if they do love you.
Right.
You will never feel that because you're not actually showing them who you are. So it's like this terrible mind game that we play with ourselves when we won't be vulnerable with others. All we're doing is stealing the chance for ourselves to end up feeling loved. Because if you're not convinced I know you, you will never feel loved by me. You'll go, well, she might like me, but she doesn't really know me. Right. If she knew me, she wouldn't like me so much, you know? So when you risk sharing some of those things, even if they probably don't seem like a big deal to the other person sometimes, it's risky to let somebody fully know you. So maybe it's just sharing your real opinion about something. Maybe it's letting them meet your aunt, your crazy aunt,
Yeah.
Maybe it's telling them a part of your story that you usually leave out because you're ashamed of it or you're embarrassed about where you came from or a mistake you made. These can all be different ways to proactively share who you really are with someone. And what you're doing turns out to be a blessing because either, number one, they love you anyway. They're like, oh, your aunt is nuts. And also,
I still love you.
I don't care.
Right.
It
doesn't affect how I feel about you. Yeah, it's
exactly.
kind of funny.
Right. And they get a richer sense of who you are, and you get the blessing at the end of the day of going, that person really knows me. And so I know I'm loved.
Yeah.
If they still choose me, if they still like me, if they still call me, I know I'm actually loved. And so we just steal it from ourselves when we won't. And again, so many times as I was writing stuff in the book, I was learning them again myself. I was going like, remember, Alli, you have a tendency to not want to be vulnerable. You should tell your best friend that thing that you've been too busy to share because it builds the connection.
Yeah.
I will come up to the surface, or I'll shortchange our time, or I'll decide for them that they don't really care about that thing. So I'll just skip right over it. We all have these ways that we convince ourselves it's okay. But when we decide to share ourselves with somebody, it ends up being a blessing in the end for us.
Yeah, I love that. We can be brave because it actually blesses us, because it actually shows us that we're loved.
Yes.
That should give us the courage to do it, right?
It's
to
like,
know that we're loved.
Yeah, it's a risk that ends up breaking open in a blessing because you go, and may I just say, it's also a blessing if you find out that the person that you told something to can't handle that.
Yeah, right. Because if they can't, they're not really your core person.
Right. If they do something either insensitive or inappropriate or dismissive with what you've chosen to share, well, then you have some more information about that relationship. And that's actually a blessing as well. Right. It might be a blessing with a sting, but in the long run, you need to know. Yeah. It's not helpful to maintain relationships in your life that can't handle who you really are. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you don't want to invest your limited time in a relationship of someone who doesn't love you for your full self. And so, as we disclose who we really are, I think there's appropriate increasing ways to do that. If you're just getting to know a new friend, you want to keep it smaller and see how they handle that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like maybe don't be the person that tells them your deepest, darkest secret the first time you have coffee. Yeah. Don't dump your whole trash can. Right. However, I do think as you get to know someone, you should be thinking, how can I purposely expose who I really am and see what happens? And so I do think of new friendships. I kind of like the beginning of a friendship because I think it's interesting to see the way that people discover that someone is loving, is trustworthy, is a good friend. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But it takes someone to initiate that. And that's truly brave. But it pays off for sure in the end. That's good. Okay, so we have our core, our inner circle people who we can start sharing more and more of our personal stuff with, who we want regular rhythms to hang out with, like you were saying. But we all have a limited capacity. We can't have 30 people that we are sharing the thing that scared us most this week with, and that we have a regular rhythm with, because we wouldn't have time to even breathe or drink our water if that was the case. So if we don't have the capacity for this intimacy and accessibility with everyone, what about this next level of friend? You call them in our book our circle. They're super important to have. Like, they're really important in our lives, but how do we bravely and graciously set boundaries with them? Because I think this can sometimes be hard. Like, Jesus had his 3, and then he had his 12, and then there's like the 70. Like, we see that he had these circles too, but sometimes just the 3 could come with him. And he was really just direct about that. And I think that, I know for me, is hard. If there's someone who I enjoy a lot, I think she's a great human, and she wants to get coffee every week, or, I don't have the capacity with that for every kind woman that I know. How do we
bravely and graciously set boundaries?
I think here it's really important to get straight. This is actually one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I think women collect relationships. We are wired relationally. And of course there's a sliding scale there, right? But I do think women tend to have the capacity for a lot of relationship in their life. And so I think it's important to think about the people strategically in your life and actually know who is in what space, because it helps us to give ourselves permission to set those boundaries. If we never think about, okay, who are my three, who's the next realm, who's my circle, who's up to my 10 or 12 friends, and then who do I love very much and very fond of, but who is beyond that. And that's what the book kind of explores. There are different ways that we interact. There's the very different ways Jesus interacted in those places. And I think one of the best things we can do at the outset is just to simply create that blueprint, to actually write down those names, think about them, commit your mind and heart to that exercise. Because when you don't, I think a lot of us, women especially, but a lot of people, walk away feeling like they've failed everybody. Like, I should have been able to see that person more. I should have been able to be better to that person. I should have had more time for the conversation or whatever. We are limited relational beings. So is Jesus. His ministry moved at 3 miles an hour. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he had 12 guys that he basically gave his life to, but he did have other people that he interacted with in many other loving, wonderful ways. And so I think for me, the trick is, first, you have to know. You have to know. And the second thing for women is to account for, and I'll just speak to women with children for a minute. A lot of times when we're building friendships, we do not account for relationship space that our children occupy in our life.
Right.
The book that I wrote is called Blueprint for Belonging. It's really about relationships, not only friendship, because
Correct.
One of the things that we have to account for is the time and space for our spouse, our children, our parents, our grown siblings. We have to actually locate them
Right.
in our relational world. And a lot of times I see women who are actively mothering, which is, if you have children, many years of your life, right? Many of your very kind of prime adult years are also spent mothering. And so we have this burn for friendship and we need it to thrive. And we overlook, in my case, I have 4 children who take up the same relational space as good friends would. It's people that I want to have conversation. Of course, each one of them is probably double a friend or whatever.
Correct. Right.
But we have to think carefully through that the relationships right in our home can, should, and do take up relational space that we have to give others. So I think a lot of times the reason I bring that up is that we overestimate our ability to maintain these day in, week in, month in friendships when we have a lot of relational things happening right around us in our homes.
Right.
And I think we could give ourselves more grace as we look at, who am I actively mothering? What does that really look like for me right now? And what's the reality of, my marriage, my children, and things like that? And Jesus was unmarried and, no children. And so I can't apply 12 friends to me who has a spouse and 4 children in my home.
You have 5 in your house. That's 5.
Right.
So you have room for 7 more. If you're exacting as Jesus. Right.
Right. I was
if each of those kids count as double, then you have 9, right? So
Right.
you only have 3 more.
Correct. So I think we just have to treat ourselves very graciously in the way that we look at our true relational capacity. And I'll just throw in there for all the ladies out there who are probably like me, I do not think I'm on the high end of the scale in terms of relational capacity as it is. Some of us have more, some of us have less. I'm probably on the low end of that scale. I don't have a ton of relationships because I don't feel at this stage in my life that I have a ton of capacity for them.
You don't. Right. You actually don't.
Right. And so I think recognizing both that you can strategically think about this, you don't have to just answer the phone and decide on the spot if you can do the coffee, you can have thought through, who is this person to me?
Yeah.
What does that mean about the time that I spend with them? How can I give myself grace when I cannot build a relationship with that person?
Right.
What might I do with that relationship instead? And the book really talks about, what does love look like in all of those different spaces? Because Jesus loved everyone he was with, but he did not love everyone the same way.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes as women, we feel the pressure to draw everybody closer, to build every single relationship. And that is not what we see in the life of Christ, nor is it what we're built for. And so for me, this book feels like a sigh of relief, like a way to, how can I think about this in my life so that I can love the people around me really well without putting all of this pressure to be and do things that I'm actually not built for. Just recognizing there's a design to our soul and how we're put together for relationships. And it's not this, you and I are not the same. And so there's a lot of grace in even just thinking about that with God. That's how I think about the book. Like, let's think strategically about this, holding hands with Jesus so he can go, you know what?
Yeah.
Here's where you are and here's where you could be. As we do that together with him, I think we end up, my hope is that people will end up just maybe knowing one or two things that they could do that would actually bring more life to their true friendships and to their own heart.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you saying two different things when you were talking about all of that. One is to give yourself grace. Like, you can't be friends to everybody all the time. You can't be everybody's counselor, mentor, soulmate, like any of it. Like, to give yourself grace, even if there are lots of people you would love to engage with, we shouldn't feel guilty about not being able to. And then I also heard you saying, like, talk to Jesus about it. Like, if there's even, and we can do this broadly, or we can do it every day. He cares about every detail in our lives. He's counted every hair on our head. Like, if you get that text and you're like, oh gosh, like, I don't know, I haven't seen that person in a while. Should I do it? Like, talk to Jesus about it. And he's going to give you, like, he's going to be like, you know what? That person would actually be really good friends with this other person. They both really need someone right now. Why don't you connect them? And you're like, oh, it doesn't, I don't have to be their everyday person, but I can still help provide them with their everyday person. Or, we can pray through all these things with Jesus, and he wants what's best for us, and he wants what's best for all those other people in our lives too. So he's going to help us figure it out.
One of my two best friends came by way of someone else connecting us, who literally just said, you two live like 2 miles apart. You don't know each other. You're both pregnant. You both love Jesus. You both go to the same church. I have no idea how you haven't met, but you haven't met. Go get coffee. We are 14 years later. She is one of my two best friends. And it was really because somebody else saw that we should know each other. Yeah. And they were absolutely right. It was like meeting somebody in the crowd who's a stranger and knowing instantly, this is not a stranger. And then getting to know them over time. And she's ended up in my core for many years now. And
That's
it was
really beautiful.
Just the sight of a friend who knew us both and said, why don't you two know each other again?
Yeah.
And they were right.
And that friend doesn't have to be in either of your core to have created a core friend for each other, right? Like, I think that's part of that, taking it off of our shoulders. We don't have to be the person for everyone, but that person, that friend was kind enough to, like, introduce you to one of your dearest friends. That's a really sweet story.
Yeah.
But not every friendship is like that, Alli. What if we've been betrayed by a friend, burned by a friend? How do we get the courage to start again, or to let ourselves be known again?
This is so hard. Was the biggest insight that I had when I explored this with a group of women way before I wrote the book. I knew that I was seeing these relationships in the life of Jesus, and I was picking up on patterns. Oh, he kind of does this with these people, but not really with these people, that kind of stuff. So I'd been thinking about this idea, and hurt, loss, and betrayal in, again, the closer the friend or relationship. It could be a divorce. It could be the death of, a sibling who is very dear to you. There's lots of versions of what loss looks like. But the holes that get created in our relational fabric, they came to the surface in every meeting that I had with this group of women I was exploring these ideas with. And it's what made me realize it's the holes that make us see that there's a design. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
when somebody gets betrayed or they suffer a loss of any kind, really, you see the hole where it was supposed to be. And you go like, God, like you literally cry out to him because something was taken away that should have been occupying, a space. So all that to say, it makes me tear up when I remember some of the conversations from that group of women, because it is so painful to lose relationships that were, I think now, of the fabric of my inner life, my soul, the way that God's created me, as I call humans, like in his way of creating an embodied soul.
Yeah.
So when you get ripped out, it literally takes a piece of you. That relationship was occupying a very real place. And I just have deep, deep empathy for that, because I have been through one or two of those painful ones myself, and it's terrible. So I think probably the most important thing for that is to say that to people, to the relief to hear you're not supposed to be okay after that happens.
Right.
Like, when that happens, you're not crazy to think that a part of you just got ripped out.
Yeah.
It actually did.
Right.
So I think it's really healthy and helpful to say that to people and to let that feel the way that it feels, because that's literally how we were made. God created us to exist in connection with him and with others. So when those connections get severed, we feel that very real thing that feels like a part of us is missing. I think it's healing to admit there's a design to it that got violated there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really is awful. And then I think in terms of being able to trust or try, I won't even go all the way to trust. I'll just say try to fill that. I'll call it a hole.
Yeah.
There may be healing, depending on the kind of loss. I would say there might need to be a healing process. I'm certainly not suggesting
You're not saying snap your fingers and...
No, I'm not saying you should jump over any necessary healing process. But when you have the instinct to try,
yes,
a lot of times that means you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There might be something there because you have this instinct. And I think recognizing that fear is going to tell you not to, and that your instinct is going to be to self-protect, that you are not going to get over that without risking. And so to share that with somebody who can help encourage you and pray for you and support you, you're going to have to take a risk. There is no other way to do it. And so I think sometimes that's hard for people to hear. Like, we want a really gentle answer, but I think there's really no way around the idea that at some point that you feel an instinct to try, that you feel like you're ready. And I have done this so many times. I have just gone, you know what? It's not worth it. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be hurt again.
It is hard. It's hard.
I will walk away and isolate because I don't want to risk it. And I've done that many, many times. And again, I will just reiterate, that is stealing from ourselves. And there's no easy way to the other side. It will always be a risk. And it's one that Jesus wants us to take. I think a fair way to think about it is a risk on him, not on that person. Yeah.
To trust Jesus to take care of you and help you find a new friend.
Him.
Yeah.
And so the question is, is that other person worth it or trustworthy or perfect or won't hurt you? The risk is, does Jesus have something for you? Can he protect you even if something goes wrong again? Like, can you do it with him? But yeah, I don't think there's a way around that eventual point. I'm not saying you should be there like 24 hours after something happens.
Of course not.
You may need a process of, healing the pain from before. But I think most of us eventually will come around to a moment where we're like, okay, I'd like to have that back. I'd like to have a friend there again. I'd like to have a date there again. I'd like to have a neighbor that I love again, whatever the case might be. So.
No, I think a lot of times that can be a nudge from the Lord as well, to be like, hey, it's time. Like, I have this for you.
It's time.
I love how you shifted it to get out of our own fear, because fear is never from God. So to get out of our fear of rejection or our fear of this might go bad again and fear we might get hurt again, to trusting Jesus. And again, we can pray like, okay, God, I met this person. They seemed nice. Is it worth me investing? Is it worth me trying? I'm afraid. Be honest with him because he wants to hear it all. I'm afraid of getting close to someone again, and let him guide you. He could say, you know what? No, that one you're going to get burned. Stay away.
Not the right one.
Right. So
keep on moving. Yeah.
Right. But he also might be like, yeah, why don't you respond to their message? Why don't you ask them? So yeah, I love making it not about us, but making it about our relationship with Jesus and what he has for us.
Yeah, when the voice of fear starts speaking loudly, it's a big, big clue, that there's probably something behind that door.
Right.
And you're definitely going to need to take that, to Jesus and probably to a flesh and blood person and say, I'm afraid and I can't talk myself out of that. I need to move myself out of that.
Right.
The way through fear is not talking to it, it's moving against it. And so I think we get stuck in our head with it a lot when we're afraid. We go like, but I want to talk about it. I do think you need to say something about it, but the way to come against fear is to move against it, not to talk against it. I mean, I talk to my fear too. Be quiet. I hear you. But the way to squash it is movement.
Action steps.
It's not talk.
So
when you hear the voice of fear, you go like, okay, I'm going to have to move my way out of this, not talk my way out of this.
Yeah. Okay. So that's if we have been hurt by a relationship. Maybe someone left, abandoned, betrayed us. But what about if we're just in a relationship? You call these counterfeit relationships in your book. That you just know it's not healthy for you, whether it's they partake in activities that you know are not of the Lord or not actually good for you personally. I mean, if they have a baking club and you have celiac, that's probably not healthy for you to be in, right? Like, I'm just trying to think of an example, right?
Yeah.
Like, if there is something that you know isn't healthy for you mentally, physically, spiritually, how do you bravely step out of it? Be like, that's not for me. I need to get away from it. And it's rarely a baking club and you have celiac. It is usually some sort of an emotional situation that someone is manipulating you. Maybe they're taking advantage of you. Maybe they just make you feel less than of yourself. Like, how do you get out of that?
Well, I think the first thing that is super brave but needs to be asked of you to yourself, and maybe with God as well. We usually stay in those situations because we are getting something out of them. Or I'll come back to another thought there as well. But if you have been in a relationship that's kind of a counterfeit of a good friend or a real connection, usually we know that. And there's a reason why we're keeping it around. Whether that reason is we don't want the difficult conversation. Maybe we're just
avoid confrontation.
Yeah, we're a confrontation avoider. That could be the case. But a lot of times we're getting a benefit out of that connection and we don't want to admit that to ourselves. We can easily admit what we see on the other side of the relationship, but sometimes we don't want to admit, I get a social benefit from this.
Right. Like, I want to be to certain things or
yes, I want others to know I'm that person's friend is a good example of that. Or we might be reluctant to kind of sever the connection, even though it's a false, empty one. But we're still deriving some kind of benefit out of that. And I think that's really often the case. Or we just do not recognize that carrying those is like carrying a suitcase of dead weight around. It's like, when this is the benefit of dealing with it, because sometimes it is hard to actually either make a boundary or make a decision or walk away from something that's empty in your life. There's an unpleasantness to that not a lot of us look forward to. But I think we often don't recognize the cost of continuing. It's like, okay, that might be unpleasant to make this decision and to have to walk away from this. But what we're doing to ourselves when we won't is it's like we're carrying around a suitcase with us. It's taking up space, both on the inside of your life and on the outside of your life, that you could be freer and healthier. You could make room for better connections.
Yeah.
And then I think, honestly, the other reason we tend to stay connected to people like that is we are afraid there won't be anybody else. Yeah. It's like well, I guess I'll take this.
Right. Settle.
Because
I'm settling.
Yeah, because it's all I have.
Right.
And so many times, not just in the world of relationships, but so many times the way I've watched God behave in my life is, will I trust him to move toward the better thing, knowing that he has every capability to meet me in that and provide. Many times when I refuse, it's because I'm not trusting that God will actually provide something better.
Yeah.
And so I'll settle for what's not great because it's like scraps, I guess I'll take some scraps because I don't really think my dad has a better meal for me. What good father wants that?
Yeah. No, that's so wise. That's so wise. God only wants goodness for us. Anyone listening, God only wants good relationships for you. He only wants that. He wants either healing in the relationships you're in or different relationships for you. If you feel really lonely, he wants good relationships. Like, this is God's desire for you, is goodness and healthy relationships. It's been his desire from the beginning of time. And Jesus is the very best friend. We can always count on him, even when all of our other relationships have turned south. Jesus is there for us, and he loves us, and he sees everything about us, and he knows us, and he loves us anyway. And that is such a gift. And just anyone who's listening, just know you're not alone, no matter how you feel. Like, Jesus is with you and loves you. Alli, you've given us so much wisdom today. I'm so grateful for all of it. I think you've given us a lot to think about and challenge us. And you've been super honest, I think, about places where you've even struggled. So we can all see none of us are perfect at this. Like, none of us are. So thank you for being honest, so that none of us are trying to compare ourselves to be as awesome as Alli Patterson is. We're just being like, okay, relationships are hard, and there's some things, proactive things we can do, and some ways we can think about it, and mainly we can turn it over to the Lord and trust in him. Alli, since the name of this show is Brave Woman, Mighty God, I ask every person who's on what brave thing they're going to do this week. So Alli, what brave thing are you going to do this week?
Okay, I'll share with you my brave thing I'm going to do. I'm going to hold a boundary in place with someone in my life that I'm tempted to cave. I'm going to hold this boundary because I know it's good and right and was put there by the counsel of God in my life and otherwise people. And I'm really tempted to compromise that boundary this week and just give in and do what's easier and, do what looks nicer, from the outside. I'm really tempted to do that this week. So this week, my brave thing is I'm going to hold a boundary in place with somebody, even when I'm tempted not to.
Yeah, I love that. And that actually ties into those counterfeit friends. Like, we need to set boundaries around those so that they don't hurt us more. Yeah, no, that's beautiful and encouraging to everyone listening. Thank you. Alli, you're awesome. I'll put all the links on how people can find you and your new book, Blueprint for Belonging, in the show notes, but please remind everyone how they can just find you if they're just listening and be like, hey, I want to follow that woman.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's super easy because it's all the same. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or my website. It's all the Alli Patterson. And you can find info on the book anywhere you buy books. It'll be available. I'd love to have you on my email list, or any way that you want to communicate. You can do that through my website. So don't hesitate to reach out. Always love to meet other amazing women of God.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alli. Thanks for being on, friend.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me as I chatted with my friend Alli Patterson. I appreciate how honest Alli was that pursuing healthy friendships can be challenging. And I especially loved when she said we can survive without friendships, but we can't thrive without them. I'm sure you got as much out of her wise, practical advice as I did. To find more from Alli and her brand new book, Blueprint for Belonging, I put all the links for you in the show notes. Make sure you're subscribing to Brave Woman, Mighty God podcast so you won't miss the next awesome episode. And for more ways to tap into the courage our mighty God has empowered you with, grab a copy of my latest book, Brave Woman, Mighty God. It's designed for individual or group study and available at booksellers everywhere. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on whatever platform you're listening in on. Reviews really help others find this content. Praying for you as you intentionally, courageously step into whatever God has for you this week, and that you remember that mighty Jesus loves you and will give you everything you need.